Hey y'all, it's Brandy. I wanted to make a video about miscarriage. So this could be a sensitive subject. If you have children that you don't want to hear, then beware. I'm going to be talking about my recent experience with miscarriage. Today was one of my last follow-ups with my OB, and some of it's fresh on my mind, some of it's not, because it happened a little over a month ago. So, and actually the kind of sad part is when my husband and I went to the OB, it was actually on my husband's birthday. So I just hated that for my husband, that on his birthday he was driving me to the doctor to see if we had had a miscarriage or not. And so that was on early in January. So I do have 4 children, and I have never had a miscarriage before. This was my first one. I have a lot of friends who have had miscarriages. I've heard of other ladies having them, but I've never heard of anybody go into much detail about it, except for maybe one person had shared, but it was a very tragic and severe thing that had happened. So you don't hear a lot of people talk about miscarriage, and I know I didn't. I would just hear somebody say that they had had a miscarriage, and that was all, and nobody ever shared in detail about it or anything else about it. I've had 4 children, and I never did really fear miscarriage before. And with this 5th pregnancy, when my husband and I found out, we were actually the most excited about this pregnancy test. I don't know if it's because we're older now, or if it's because we've seen how our older 3 boys have been such great big brothers to their 1-year-old younger brother, and it was just so sweet. But for whatever reason, my husband and I were just the most excited about this pregnancy test being positive. And it was just so exciting experiencing those emotions. And of course, we told our 4 boys that we were pregnant, and my 3rd son down, he was so excited, and he was even though I wasn't showing, my stomach wasn't like huge and big, he was still already kissing my stomach and, you know, talking about the baby. And I'm an all or nothing type person, so I had already bought another childbirth book, and I'd already started reading it. I had already started rereading another week by week pregnancy book, and I'd already read several chapters in it again. And I had already bought prenatal vitamins, and I was taking those, and my belly was already poking out, and I was already starting to show, and I was already thinking, okay, where are we gonna put this new baby, and how are we gonna rearrange the crib and the bedrooms and everything. And I was just already thinking to the future a lot about this. And we told our whole church family. I posted it on Facebook. We told all of our friends and family that we were expecting. And so I was about 10 weeks along when I had the miscarriage. And before the miscarriage, I felt like I had a head cold or a small kind of cold, like a sinus infection. I wasn't sure if I had a sinus infection or a head cold. And then it started getting worse. I just felt really bad and was laying around, and I didn't go to the doctor, but I was just doctoring myself up at home. And I never had a fever. I just was kind of laying around, sneezing and blowing my nose. And I wasn't taking my herbal tincture for the cold and flu because I was pregnant, and I didn't want to take that while I was pregnant just in case. I mean, it might be safe too, but I wasn't sure. So normally I would have taken that and not had to deal with a cold. but I wasn't taking that herbal remedy. And so I was just allowing the cold to, or sinus, whatever it was, to, last the few days and get it out of my system. But during that time, I started spotting, and I thought, well, that's strange. And so, but I didn't have any cramping, so I thought, well, maybe that's normal. I told a couple people, and they were like, well, if you're not cramping, it's okay. But then a day or two went by, and the spotting it was more like, a different color, and it was more, and so I was starting to get concerned. And then I did start kind of cramping, and I was still kind of sick as well. So I had a lot of stuff going on with my body, and I was having all kinds of things go on with my body. I was having, like I told my husband, I said, my body is way out of whack. Something is wrong. Something's not right. And so then I remember at one point I got nauseous, so I took a ginger chew, one or two of those ginger chews that it's just ginger and sugar, and that always helps. And I just didn't feel good. And then the cramping came back again, and it kind of felt like afterbirth pains. After you have a baby, your uterus contracts back down to get smaller, and that's kind of what it felt like to me. And so my husband prayed for me, and I was praying, and I asked a few people to pray for me at that point. And I think I called the doctor around that time, but it was late. It was at night when I was experiencing some of this. And so the next day I called the doctor again, and they wanted me to come in, but I didn't feel good enough to come in that day, so I waited a day or two until I felt better. Just my energy, I was just so drained, I was so tired, I was just laying on the couch. And so then, on my husband's birthday, we drove to the OB, and at that point I felt like I was on my period. And I had already passed like a few little blood clots at home, but when I went to the OB, I was like, I just feel like I'm on my period. And the first thing the OB asked me, he said, do you feel pregnant? And in my heart, I thought the answer was no, I don't feel pregnant anymore. And it's weird how it's hard to explain. Like, I did feel pregnant because I was pregnant. But then when I was having the bleeding and the cramping at some point during that, and my stomach even felt flatter during all that, I told my husband, I was like, this just doesn't feel right, and I didn't feel pregnant anymore. And so they did an ultrasound, and you could see a sac like this big, but it was empty. And the lady, I guess, was trying to be nice and said, well, maybe you're not that far along yet. But I knew I was 10 weeks along. And I had all the pregnancy symptoms. I knew. And so then I had a dumb moment, and I said, well, can you hear the heartbeat? And she said, there's not even a baby in there. There's not even a baby. It was just an empty sac. And I felt dumb because I was like, oh, well, yeah, because you could obviously see the sac, but it was empty, where the baby should have been in the sac. So then the OB said, you're probably going through a miscarriage, but you need to come back in a week and see if you're having one or not. And I thought, oh, I'd just rather be done with this than to kind of wait and see. So I went home, and I think it was that night or the next night, 3 of my boys had a basketball game, and my parents were in town. They live out of state, and they happened to be in town staying with us for a few days to celebrate a late Christmas and see the boys play ball. So I decided to go to the ball game with my parents and watch the boys play. Well, while I was at the game, the cramping got worse, and I remember sitting there thinking, I'm watching 3 of my sons play ball while at the same time one of my babies is dying in me right now. It was a really weird feeling, and I had to go to the bathroom several times during the game, and I was passing bigger blood clots, and nobody at the game knew what I was experiencing except for my parents and my husband. It was just really weird. I tried to sit in a corner and not talk to anybody, and I was kind of bent over a little bit because I was cramping, and by the end of the game I was like, I need to go. The cramping's starting to hurt. I need to go get some Tylenol. So my husband stayed at the game with the boys to help clean up, and my parents took me and my 1-year-old to go to the store to get some Tylenol and then to go home. And while my mom was in Kroger, it was me and my dad and my 1-year-old were in the car waiting for her, and that's when the worst of it happened. Was in the Kroger parking lot in my dad's car. And I just had the worst painful cramps. And normally I don't ever have cramps, ever. I don't have monthly cramps. I mean, for the first 3 of my children, I didn't use any medicine. I didn't have an epidural. I had the first 3 of my children all naturally without any drugs or medicine, and it really wasn't a whole lot of painful. It was intense at times, but I didn't want an epidural. I didn't need an epidural. I enjoyed being able to know when to push the baby out. And so I guess you could say that I might have a high pain tolerance, but I think the Lord just gave me 3 supernatural childbirths with the first 3, which I love that book, by the way, Supernatural Childbirth by Jackie Mize. It's a really thin book. It's amazing. With my 4th child, they had to induce me. I was 41 weeks, and so then I labored all day. I wanted to sleep, so I did get an epidural so I could sleep, and in the morning I pushed the baby out. So anyways, these cramps with the miscarriage were worse than labor contractions. And I was just like, this is so painful. These cramps are so painful. And so I got out an essential oil to rub to help with the pain while I was waiting on the Tylenol to come. And I called my doctor on like his cell phone during that time just to make sure. I said, you know, what can I take? Can I take Tylenol or this and that? So he said I could. He said this is probably the worst of the miscarriage. So I took, so I was just having these awful cramps. I called a friend who had a couple miscarriages. I asked her if that was normal. She said yes. And then my mom got back with the Tylenol, and I took it, and by that time the cramps had gone away. We drive the rest of the way home, and on the way home it's like a flood came out. It's like all this stuff came out, and I was in the car, and I remember kind of jumping up and going, oh my goodness, I didn't know it was going to be like this. And I said, I need a towel, hand me a towel. So they found me a couple towels, and it was just everywhere, and we made it home. I went straight to the shower, and I just remember seeing how big the blood clot was, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is just awful. But after all that passed, I felt physically better, and I got a shower, felt better, and I thought surely that's the end of it, but it wasn't. It took about 15 days. So I bled for about 15 days, and over those 15 days I was really weak, I was really tired. I felt like I was kind of on my period, but I knew I was having a miscarriage. And there would be times when I'd be sitting at the dining room table, homeschooling my children, and a big blood clot would come out. And it just, you feel so vulnerable when you're bleeding and you can't stop it, you can't help it. And I thought about the woman in the Bible with the issue of blood, that she had bled for 12 years. And I can't imagine how weak and sick she must have felt, because I looked physically pale after I went through this, and I had to take iron, and it just took the life out of me. And you know, the scripture says life is in the blood. And so I thought about the woman with issue of blood who said, if I could just touch Jesus, I'll be healed and made whole. And when I was going through this, and I was so weak and just didn't know what was happening, all I could pray was, Lord, help me. Because my 1-year-old was being a 1-year-old, and there were times when, well, my parents had to go back home, and there were times when my husband had to work or be gone, and I would be at home with a 1-year-old trying to go through all of this, and that was pretty difficult, but I just remember saying, Lord, help me. I need your help. Please get me through this. And I definitely, I didn't know that miscarriage could be so physically hard and physically long. I used to think it was just like a one-day thing, which I guess if you get a DNC, maybe, you know, that's different, because it's like a one-time procedure, and some women take some kind of pill that makes them have the miscarriage, but I didn't take anything. This doctor let my body do all of this on its own, so it did take longer, but I would rather do things the natural way. You know, I didn't want to take the pill. He didn't make me, so that's just kind of how it worked out. But everybody's experience is a little bit different based on how it all happens. But either way, anyway, it's hard and it's sad, and you know, we don't understand why, but I'm a Christian, so I know that when I get to heaven, I'm going to meet this baby in heaven. So that gives me hope, and that gives me joy in the midst of pain. And now I can relate to all the ladies out there who've been through miscarriage, and my heart goes out to you, because I know how you feel, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to pray for each other in this. But I have hope, because I know I'll see my baby in heaven. So I hope this helps somebody, and find your hope in Jesus. God bless.